And I'm going live.
It's gonna be pretty intense.
I know she's smart.
No, first
I
suggestion.
know, none of that. You're not getting bad vibes on my watch. Go someone else to visit that. You know, at least like have it
That
ingrained
would
in
be,
the head as an adult.
yeah, that would be good. There's one, or no, it's Washington.
There's the Dolly Museum, and there's also, which I'm happy to find tickets and send you guys to the, there's also the market, which is cool. There's also 3 right in this area and 1 way to a warehouse record stores. So the record stores always have all the weird paraphernalia and tchotchkes and things to look at, like the sci-fi stuff and, you know.
Oh, there's some really cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So my point is, do the Google. The password is on the refrigerator. And so just go have fun.
Ba-ba-ba. Hi, all. Renee's over there chatting away with folks. We're going to get started here. I'm already live.
Okay, I'm signing on and sitting over there. And we got a few minutes.
Yep, eyes go on to get people on board.
So what are we gonna talk about?
I don't know. I'll think of something.
I wonder if people know to show
Yeah,
up.
I don't know. And you're being recorded as you speak.
I know. I get it. This has been a crazy week. I'm working up food. We should talk about digestion.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
And
it's disgusting.
you are from.
Do you want to tell me what you were talking about, laughing at, or is that never?
Nope, I'm laughing at you.
No, I meant before you were laughing at something.
No,
And you said you'd tell me later.
no. Any questions? Oops. All right. I never know when.
Do you need your phone?
Uh,
It just happens to be next to me.
sure. Dashboard. I'm never quite sure where the chat feed is.
I'm signing on.
Yep, please. I'm just trying to find it because I know it's on here occasionally. I don't need all of that
Why don't you Google how do I get my chat feed up?
because I'm afraid I will drop the video stream.
Even if you just do it in the
Yeah,
inbox?
I'm working on stuff. There we go. So we got that going. The picture's not too horrendous. I have no idea if anybody is online yet, so. Oops.
That's me.
No.
Join room?
So presumably, I will know when you get on, and if you say something, I will know if I can actually see the
Okay.
chatty stuff.
I'm trying to get on, but
Hi all, it's Bob and Renee from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies. And we'll get started here in about 10 minutes, it looks like. Feel free to post your questions, say hi, let us know where you're from. And, you know, if I don't get any questions, I'm going to just talk like a crazy man for 2 hours.
glue worms.
Yeah. Maybe even cover glue worms, who knows?
I'm trying to find us. And I feel
Oh, I
like
even tagged you on it.
I feel like I need to
That's
do a
probably.
class and how to work this.
Mhm.
Watch
So
live.
you have me, yeah.
Watch live. Oh. There you are.
And I don't know if I see anybody on board yet. Oh, I think I see a Renee.
And I sent you a
Yay!
message. There it is.
Oh, nice. So I'm actually able to see the chat for a change.
Okay.
Oh, I have to keep moving it down.
All right. So I'm going to.
So, and if you don't know, we're here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, and there may be people wandering by that you don't see, making funny faces at us because We are in the Grand Central District at 2520 Central Avenue. And this has been for the last, at least 20 years that I know of, probably longer than that. This has been the center of the Gay Pride celebrations here in St. Petersburg. And yay, COVID. It's somewhat smaller than in years past. At least we're having it. It got canceled last year. And there's a lot of folks out on the street enjoying the various festivities that are going on. And we're going to, hopefully when this is all over, they'll hear some music and so forth going on. So
And you might hear stuff in the background, and that's okay.
yeah, we still got a few clients here at the clinic. I'm done for the day. Well, at least for that part of my day. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. I thought that might be
What?
an interesting subject. Dealt with everything from dietary struggles to cancer today. So I had lots of good questions from my clients today, my patients today.
Do you want me to write any of them down for you?
Nah, I know what they are.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out. I feel so technologically illiterate.
Oh, you're on, right?
Yeah, I'm on that tab right there.
Okay.
I'm using the other tab to put into my feed, my personal feed.
Oh, to share it?
Mm-hmm.
I can show you how to do that. Did you find it?
I don't know.
Are you on the event? So go to one of those. I think it's the far right one. And it'll say,
Mm-mm. That's what I'm
go to the
saying.
next one over. There we go. So copy the top one. And that one you can post into your Do Hinkamus. Yay, somebody else is here.
Who was that?
I don't know. I can tell they're here, but I can't tell who they are. We're going to get started here in about 6 minutes. So feel free to say, hey, if you got any questions to post, feel free to. If not, I will babble endlessly for the next 2 hours once we get started. So hopefully we got a few more people logging on here. Oh, hey, Maddie. It's funny, we just sent Renee's brother over to the Cat Cafe.
And I call him Maddie.
Yeah, that's right.
On top of that. His name's Matthew, but I've never called him that even a single time, except when I yelled at him when he was a little kid. Okay, so I don't know how to do this.
So
I'm just trying to...
And Maddie, you're allowed to post questions too.
I'll put Eva on.
Hmm.
We'll put Eva on when she comes
Make
out.
her famous. And Maddie, pardon my mad ramblings, even though you're the only other person on here other than Renee. But since this will all be uploaded onto YouTube later, I will say random craziness for the next 5 minutes till the rest we get officially started.
Spiritual or otherwise, you guys can
Oh,
all
yeah.
ask crazy questions about limpias and cleansings and clearings and demons and...
And needless to say, for anybody who bothers to tune in for the first 5 minutes and then gets bored and goes elsewhere, even when it's on YouTube, we do this in the last Friday of every month, and I apologize, we were slow in getting it up this time. But we kind of started the open forum, so it was an opportunity for people of all levels, herbalists or acupuncturists or spiritual healers, to sit and ask questions that we all have some. So this is an opportunity for us to clarify, give our 2 cents worth, crazy opinions, you name it.
Okay, so that's the last sharing that's happening.
All right,
Back-
no more sharing.
Back over.
Oh, that's really weird.
Hey, yay, Liz.
Oh, hey, Liz.
Use this time to ask us any questions you ever want to know, and it can be spiritual too. You haven't been in tradition class in a really long time. Maybe there's some questions that you want.
What's the meaning of life?
Yeah, that was so funny. Random craziness from Bob is always appreciated, Maddie says.
Yeah. No, I actually can see the chat for a change.
Oh, good. I'm okay.
I don't really understand why I can't see it half the time, but I can see it this time.
I don't like it that you keep checking it when you're trying to talk, though. When I'm sitting here reading it to you, like it's okay.
No, at some point, once I actually am not just babbling incoherently, then I actually stop reading it.
I'm glad that you can't see it sometimes, so that you can concentrate on what you're doing and I can answer. For sure.
What time is it? We got 4 more
We got 4
minutes.
We're all
Yay.
good.
What classes are we still teaching? We already finished animal care. We've got nervous system is done. And holy crap.
We need a new thing.
We need a new thing.
We did growing medicinal plants.
May 20th. Oh yeah, this is the old one. We need more.
And our endocrine system. It
Here.
may not be the old one.
Renee. Yeah, do you want to go see if you can find one at one of the other fronts?
We have medicine making going on right this second.
Yeah, no, I know what's happening this second. I don't know what classes are coming up. If you can look at, I think there's an updated one to that.
Why don't we talk about pinched nerves
Yeah.
and the blocked up gallbladder lines? Urinary. Here, is this one? Look down there. Does that look better?
This one looks more up to date. Yes.
Okay, so these are
All right.
the barbs.
Because we are starting in 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm gonna put these in the garbage.
Yay, more people.
Nice.
Hi, next new person. I was going to say, if any of you have any questions, we'll get started in 2 minutes here, but feel free to type into the chat any questions you might want to have us cover. And we will be some herb question or acupuncture or whatever question covering fools.
Yep. I think about all your students always wanting answers from you about the meaning of life. So,
All right. Ba, ba, ba. Got another minute. Pardon my swill drinking here. Liz, are you back in town? I know you were out jet setting around somewhere. All right, we'll get started here in 1 minute.
I'm singing Bruce Springsteen and Marvin Gaye. What has gone on in my head
Well,
today?
you got
That
questions.
That is the deal. The meaning of life, Bob is pretty good at.
There's a question above that. People aren't wearing enough hats.
That's the meaning.
43. All right.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so I'm going to go to her question
Yeah,
here.
and we're going to get started here in just 1 second.
Bob, are you moving the thing?
What?
You're over there? No.
No. That's me bouncing around. All right. I'm going to say it's officially 6 p.m., so we're going to get started. If you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, and this is Renee, and she is also an herbalist, a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, as well as our Western and our Western and spiritual medicine teacher, practitioner, person. We're here from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. And we started doing this actually last December. And we were all locked down in COVID and bored and wanting to learn stuff and missing our conferences and things like that. We decided that we would just have an opportunity for people of all skill levels and wannabe skill levels to have an opportunity to ask questions in the herbal realm, the acupuncture realm, and so forth. So we had such a good outpouring of it, we decided that we were just going to keep it going, even though COVID is slowed down and we're allowed to escape. You know, we live in Florida, so therefore COVID doesn't exist. No. And I'm going to have to do myself.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. according to what I just saw in Sam's Club, it does not exist.
Yeah, so I want to take a quick opportunity to do a selfless plug. You can learn more about the school and the clinic here at AccuHerbals.com, as well as TraditionsHerbSchool.com. There we go, both of those. And we also have the start of our Western Herbal program coming up in November is our first starting point. November, December, we've got Western Herb 101 coming up. And sorry, y'all just missed animal care. Well, Maddie was there, so you didn't miss it. And then we've got an ongoing anatomy and physiology for the herbalists. So last night we just did the digestive system. It looks like on July 22nd is the skin, and those are just $25 for that, and taught by our own school administrator Trisha. And we've also got our medicine making series coming up, and both of those are nice standalone classes. They're like 2.5 hours, and so the medicine making class started tonight, but each one of those is standalone. So our next one is July 8th. With making endless summer shrubs and bitters. So I know you'll at least be making some digestive bitters that if you're not familiar with, there's lots of cool stuff. And there's lots of other classes coming up from that. If you're interested in the, Eva's on here. Awesome. Hi. Aren't you still here in the clinic with us?
Yeah, she just walked by.
The Chinese program will be starting in November. I don't actually remember the date, but if you're interested, just give a shout to the school and they'll get you started. Have you got some questions for us, Renee?
Yes, I do.
Throw them at me.
Okay, so, it's opening up a can of worms.
What else?
Do you want me to?
Throw it.
Okay, so the very first one that comes from Maddie is like an hour if we slow down our talking. So really,
we're not going to slow down our talking, so just have at it.
So I'm going to read it straight from her so that it comes out. It says, "Can you speak anything having to do with spiritual protection when doing?" Now she says energy work, but I know for us, we feel like we
those are two very different things.
Yes, but we need spiritual protection, or we need protection, energy protection, just by doing, like if you were an ER doctor. And so how do we protect ourselves going into a practice where you're dealing with very sick people in a general sense?
Yeah, and I'm going to say that it's a really important question. It's funny, it was a couple of years ago, we actually had a "Oh, how you doing? Where are you practicing? Blah, blah, blah." She's like, "I'm not practicing. I practiced for 6 months and I got so ill, I couldn't continue." And when we probed a little bit more, what she told us was she was so sensitive to other people's energy and their pain and so forth that the school never taught her how to protect herself from other people's stuff.
I want to say something real quick. That my response was what you just said. Like, I was flabbergasted that there hadn't been a discussion.
Yeah, that's not something that was ever discussed at acupuncture school. Of like, we're sitting here manipulating energy. We're working with energy, and we're working with some really serious.
Hey, you're frozen. Okay, there you go.
Okay,
Keep going.
we're working with these seriously ill and both physically and spiritually, emotionally ill people, and we actually care. So if we're a compassionate human and we're day in and day out working with these folks, we have to find a way to protect ourselves. And I'll tell on myself a little bit. So one of my 4 billion jobs that I've done over the centuries, one of them was working with severely emotionally disturbed juvenile delinquents in a wilderness camp. We had my group was, I think we had 10 kids on 880 acres that we built log cabins. We went on 30-day canoe trips. We just had a generally crazy time, but these kids had primarily been sent to us through the prison system, that they had all been adjudicated, they'd spent at least 6 months in juvenile detention centers.
That was a demon.
Yeah, and at some point, one of them had tried to commit suicide. And that was scary enough in its own right. And then we had to physically, not with like straitjackets or anything, but we would just hold them down if they were having a moment. And one of the kids got his fingernails down into somebody's radial artery and was about to break the skin. The kid was screaming, and I almost hit the kid to get his arm off of him. And it was a horrible thing for me. Like the idea of hitting a kid was not what I
Not
was
in
there.
your wheelhouse?
Yeah,
Yeah.
not what I was there for. Not my wheelhouse. And luckily, I did not. But at the end of it, I'm sitting there, literally shaking and crying, and like was ready to walk out of the place. And it was because at that point in my life, I didn't. I knew of spirituality. I knew about all these things, but they were cute ideas that were not something that I was practicing on a regular basis. I liked a lot of the ideas, and I was concerned that as going forward, at the time working primarily as a counselor, that I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle taking on other people's emotional stuff and their baggage and taking that onto myself. It's making me very unhappy and not well. And luckily, through practice and experimentation, I kind of figured out, like, you can be compassionate and without taking on those burdens from somebody else. That we can even sit there and shed a tear, and we can give a hug, and then go on to your next client. And that is a trick. And some of it is just the mentality we go into it, where we recognize that we have one whole hour with this human being, and every word that we say, every action that we portray, is vitally important. And so everything that we do, we have to be, how am I using this to elicit information from the client that I'm working with? And how are the words that I'm speaking somehow aiding this person into finding that state of balance? And so whether my actions with the herbs, whether the actions of my talking, my magnets, my ears, all of those things, if I'm doing acupuncture, those acupuncture needles, those should have a purpose and a role in my process to figure out the mystery of the human. And so keeping that mental focus, and if crying with them, it has clinical benefit, which I think it does sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, then so be it, then we should do that. And recognizing, like, if you're choking up, which is so often, it's like, how could you not? You're
But knowing you're affected.
But recognizing that it's okay for me to cry with them at this moment, but I can keep the conversation going. I can sit here and recognize that I need to press points on their heart meridian in order to help them control it, or I can demonstrate on myself so that I can stop crying. And that's okay. The act of, like, they're crying, okay, here's a Kleenex box. That's enough of an act of compassion sometimes, and allowing them that safe space to lose their crap for a minute. But then there's things like, oftentimes you all see me with this, especially these rosary peas. There's a couple of different names for them. These are designed for protection. They keep death away. They also act as, when we call them rosary peas, it's because we can use them as worry beads. And so my ADD nature requires me that I'm fiddling constantly. So literally, I'm sitting here asking about all of these really difficult subjects. I'm sitting here counting rosary peas, or not counting them, just fiddling with them. But it also allows me to keep this protection literally right here, where it might, like, you keep your energy away from me, I'm literally holding on to these. There's other things that we can see, and I think it's, who does the...
Tapping that you have,
Yeah, but it's not...
it's not EFT.
Yeah, but who's the woman, spiritual healer woman, I think she's down south of here, no matter.
Okay.
That she talks about zipping up your protection. And some of you may notice this, that most of the practitioners here, and some of the, we have some experienced students as well, that there's this momentary hesitation before you walk into a room with a client where literally you visualize this idea of, I am going to zip up my spacesuit, and it's a spacesuit of energetic protection. And that we create this bubble around us that allows us to, with some level of confidence, walk in. And there's something I've talked about occasionally with, oddly, the Chinese students. And I don't think anybody practices it, but there's times when we feel psychically, energetically, whatever language we want to use, that like, oh, I just, like, that was a chi vampire, or I can't believe I just had to deal with all of their emotional baggage. Then we'll walk out and we use the yerba santa, which is the root beer plant, or the false kava, it's got a couple different names, that will literally wipe ourselves off with that. We can just use the act of washing our hands as a way to do that. It's funny, anybody who's been in an acupuncture treatment with me or followed me, whether or not I need to wash my hands or not doesn't matter. I always excuse myself to go wash my hands. And part of that, I'm washing my hands, but I could sterilize that with alcohol in the room if I wanted to, if I was in a hurry. But it's an opportunity before I come in physical contact with that person, when I start to manipulate their energy with acupuncture or massage or whatever, that I have an opportunity to remove my own crap, to literally wash it off me, and at that same time reinforce that bubble of protection with me. I know you have other thoughts with that as well.
Yeah, like I actually, not that you didn't do this, but can you give 3 practices specifically, like actual things that you have either heard about, seen another practitioner do, or you do, to either get something on you or keep it from getting to you to begin with?
The pause before I go into the room to create that energetic space.
Like a bubble or
yeah,
a space?
It's literally
Okay.
I always think of zipping up a spacesuit.
Okay.
But it can be a bubble.
Shows the young boy
Yeah,
in
I'm
you.
a boy. Come on,
Yeah,
what do you want?
totally.
So creating a field of protection as a sign of respect as well. You'll find that I sit, and we've talked about this in the ethics class, where I make sure that I'm not blocking the door. I literally, and it has nothing to do with COVID, I did it long before COVID. The clients sit up against the wall on this side. My chair is all the way on the other side of the wall, because I want as much physical space from their energetic juju as I can get, because it's when we're in close proximity to someone that we feel their emotions a little too strong. When we take their pulse, it's literally the first time we touch them that their energy, we're interacting with their energy. And so that idea of, like, we save it for last because we want to build rapport. We also want to stabilize our energy, as well as kind of get a good feel for where their energy is and how much we might want to interact. How much do we have to protect ourselves before we interact with them?
Because I will tell you, and especially since Maddie was the one that asked the question,
Yeah.
Liz has been with me for a dramatic amount of the situation. I don't know if Maddie realizes, because we were outside, but it's funny that you said that, because I literally do the same thing. Like, I walk into a room.
Yeah, we do it without thinking.
And as we're talking to the person, like, hi, nice to meet you, I'm like rearranging the furniture. Like I am. I'm like pulling the table back and pushing a chair here and doing that. And then I'm putting myself in a space where I feel like, all right. And the other day when I was with you, because we share a room sometimes, I don't know if you noticed when you came back in, I was all the way up against the wall and your chair was pushed to the side to the edge.
And she has some rough energy, the person we shared for a moment there.
And so it's funny, because I don't think about it anymore, because we're just so used to being like, you don't got to go home, but you can't stay here. But I will tell you, Maddie, and I know that Liz is a healer, and she has worked with me and others for a while, even in her own practice. And so, Maddie, you haven't had the opportunity for that situation, that we've literally trained to get ourselves to a place where that is not something that is able to affect us.
And it doesn't have to be that formal.
No,
I mean,
it
it's
doesn't.
great.
No.
And if we're going to
go
do
outside and slap the ground and get a connection.
If we're going to do spiritual work on people, then you need spiritual training. But like this is different. This is our interaction as a human being in a world, or interaction as a herbalist who's going to work with somebody. And I think it's not,
It shouldn't
my
be
idea is,
mysterious.
the idea of zipping it up. I think it comes down to taking a moment to recognize that it's a thing.
It's the nothing's for nothing,
And-
everything counts.
Yeah, and creating an intention going into
Right.
that treatment room is what's the single most important aspect. And so if we create intention and we create a ceremony or practice that its intention is to provide us a safe barrier from other people's stuff.
It's deliberateness.
The deliberate is a great word.
Yeah.
Then it will work, and it requires practice. And I'll add to this because I don't know everybody who's on right now, but at least a few of you are our students. And I'll add to that something we usually talk about with the students. I don't know if it's come up in a while. And even if you don't believe in any of this, it doesn't matter. You ask any massage therapist, any acupuncturist, any herbalist, there are chi vampires out there, people who will suck the energy and the life out of you.
Yep.
And we always joke about, they don't come to student clinics. So 3 nights a week we have an intern clinic
They
here
come
that our
looking
senior
for us,
students
don't they?
And so they won't come into the clinic to see our students because Renee and I are here to protect you.
Yeah.
And we literally keep this barrier that it's not even a conscious thought. We're like, oh no, we're hyper protective of y'all. We ain't gonna let them mess with you. But with your clients, when you're here in the clinic, like, we got your back. Like, we're always looking at it. We're asking you questions. We're going in double check. So in a way, they're our clients as much as they're your clients, and we're making sure you're safe and that client is safe. But the second you get out into your personal practice, when you are no longer affiliated
Like
with
the
us,
first week.
the freaks come out.
Because we're not there.
Every massage therapist will tell you that there's some weirdos who keep calling, and they'll actually say, oh, he called you too? Every herbalist has the person who has just the most bizarre set of symptoms, that everything you give them has an adverse reaction, and you're correct, and they're keep rescheduling. You're like, please, I hope they don't come back. The day you figure out how to literally create that intentional protection, that you put your foot down and say with calm compassion, like, I don't think I'm the best practitioner for you, they all flutter back into the darkness and they won't bother you anymore.
And Maddie, you said it specifically for energy healing, so I want to tell on Eva a little bit of her and I go back and forth because I'm an odd patient for her. I'm an odd patient in general. And we talk about how sometimes when the needles go in, she can feel energy moving backwards, like up by her arm, and I can feel her energy coming back forward and towards my needles, which means that she is aware, she has made a conscious decision that, like, nope, that's not happening, and she reverses that energy and flows it back in the direction it's supposed to be in.
That's fancy.
Yeah, and so it is and it isn't, though, because if Maddie's coming up or any of you are coming up with feeling tired or drained or that kind of thing, when you're doing energy work, we're supposed to be conduits, therefore nothing should be taken from us and nothing should come back towards us. We should be moving forward fluid through the earth and around. And so just as easy as imagining that situation the second you think it's stepping out of line, reversing the flow. And an easy way that I remind myself to do that is to take a big breath and breathe out and push it away. And so that's a way to think about it. So if you're in practice doing energy work and you're feeling that happen, breathe in from the ground and out and away from you, and it will reverse the flow of that energy, literally like ions, like moving the ions in a different direction. And so it's important to understand that that's a good, easy practice. But the other night when we were together, I was talking about how one of the Colombian shamans, well, they're medicine men, curanderos, not shamans, taught me that if your shaman looks like Liberace, like if all of the regalia is stacked up so much that he looks like Mr. T or Liberace, then that means he is prepared exponentially, that layers out for what's coming that night. So like if they come showing up with the feather boa and all of the regalia, like, be worried about what's happening.
They're going to be good.
But it shows how they're stacked out. They literally have placed the plants in a row, in a row, in a row, in a row, pushing out to make a barrier.
And I don't recommend you start that way as an herbalist. You might scare off some clients.
No,
with,
you don't want to. They look crazy.
Once you get established, then you can get a little bit more casual, or you'll need more protection depending on your point of view. But and we'll wrap it up by just saying, create intentional practices, and it gets easy. You don't even think about it at some point, but create that intention. It's taking your hat that it's on this way. You're like, oh, client. You turn your hat around and you're like, all right, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Dive into it.
And I've gotten into the thought process of doing that even walking into a grocery store, because sometimes I can feel somebody walk up behind me, so I got to push that energy back
All right.
and then pull mine in.
What else have we got?
All right, so we're going to go for, you get to choose.
Yeah, just throw something at me.
Okay, so let's do.
And anybody new who's coming on
Do we
here,
have-
just post your questions if you like, or you can sit there quietly.
Sure, or feel free to comment in and I will respond in the chat and continue to say. So this one also happens to come from Maddie, which is
Thank you, Maddie.
for picking our herbs and using herbs topically versus internally. Is there a rubric for ones that can be used topically versus internally, or is it just a matter of getting to know your medica, or is it something that we're just magic at? I have a converse
We're
answer.
totally magic.
Yeah, like I have a converse answer that's kind of weird, but absolutely it lets you, if you have anything to say about that.
So it's really interesting. I have opinions about topical use of
That's why I
herbal
said
medicine,
we have opinions for sure about
and
it.
whether they're a liniment or a plaster or a poultice. I actually think topical medicine is amazing. That said, I tend to go through phases. And so like I won't do any topicals for like 6 months or something, and all of a sudden like everybody gets topical.
all get topical.
And when I'm creating topicals, I will still think in formulas, and because Maddie's a Chinese student, we do have classical topical formulas that are mentioned sometimes in the textbook, or sometimes there's books specifically centered around topical medicine. But it is super appropriate to do your regular diagnosis: hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, yin or yang, and find the correct formula, and then strip out those herbs that may not be vital from an external perspective. So trying to think of a good example. If you had a dry, slightly red, itchy, topical rash, and this is probably not a good example, but whatever. And so you're like, well, there's yin deficiency and it's on the liver channel. So we might say, well, internally I might use Lu Wei Di Huang Wan, 6 flavor Romania. And so what are the key herbs in there that we need to actually nourish the yin? And we might just go with the Sheng Di, the Romania. And so we could use that as our base herb to, let's say, make a liniment that we could do. Actually, we might do an oil, that might work better. Do an extraction, whether it be an oil, or we can just do a decoction and then apply that topically. But then with any topical herb or any topical formula, I like to keep it, and I'm going to say strictly under 9 herbs. I prefer it in the 3 to 5 range, and at least one of them has to be aromatic. And so
Why, Bob? Why?
the idea, and we can use release exterior herbs, diaphoretic herbs, however we want to call it,
totally using
because
that tomorrow.
we can, if here's our skin pores, our ghost gates, we want to open those up, those interstitial spaces, so that the medicine can pass through. And whether it's passing through from a energetic standpoint or passing through from a physical, there's some absorption through the skin. We have to open those spaces up. So the aromatic herbs, and whether that's something like boho, a mint, whether it's something like dang guai, duho, chiangho, any of those herbs, and we can use any of our aromatic laminaceae, any of our mint family, as a way to open that space up. I just think I made 3 topicals today.
You did. You got crazy.
I know.
You were here early and bright and bushy.
I had an hour to spare and too much coffee, so I was in a formula making fool, and I am constantly shocked at the benefits of topical herbs when we can put a formula on target to where there is an issue. It can be so effective. Summer, I actually have a class. I taught a weekend intensive that was just topical medicines, and I was talking about it for massage therapists as well as herbalists and acupuncturists, because it's not well covered in acupuncture school. It's not something we utilize or talk about. What else we got?
Okay. So there's several that have to do with medicine making, as well as a topic of we have new herbalists in particular come to us that are very excited in class. And one of the things that we have a problem with, so it's funny that this comes up as in the top 10 questions for like a place like Herbal Academy, is what books do you depend on? Is there a list of books that you depend on? Is there somebody that you absolutely trust? And that eventually goes into resources, but you don't have to go there. We can skip and put that later on the list if you. Do you have any particular books that, like, hands down, you go to and trust, that even if it's not what you agreed with, you were okay with it?
You know, it's easier from the Chinese realm. You know, it's very stylized, and it varies a little bit on what I'm looking for. We have an extensive library here. If any of you have not been into the clinic,
of shame and of glory.
Yes. Just because it's on the shelf doesn't mean we love it.
Yeah.
But we have just an endless amount of resources for books, and some of them literally is like sound like a cool book. I'm going to buy it, and we're like, oh, it's crap. Well, I won't throw it away. I'm going to still keep it. But as a general rule, from the Chinese perspective, I really like Chen and Chen for the single herbs, the Materia Medica. And I really like Bensky for formulas. But now I'm going to back myself. I'm going to back out of that statement. That is my general. If I'm researching an herb, I'm researching a formula. Those are my go-tos. Do you want to answer?
If you want me to.
Yeah, you can try. But today I was researching a formula for some hard masses on a client that I wanted to use a topical to start to I was trying to use a topical to create to break those down because it was causing some severe arm pain. And what happened was there wasn't really good information on that.
Can you remember that? Okay, got it.
So, sorry, I'm being distracted by Renee.
He's here for the class.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing was I started looking for some different ideas, and I find that Bensky has a single herb book as well. It's a little bit too much detail. And so I wanted to start to look at some cultural and some traditional uses of some herbs so I could put a better formula together, especially from that topical perspective. And so I used that to go a little bit farther away and to look at some more obscure ideas. And sometimes I need that. And sometimes I need the concreteness that I find in Chen and Chen. And Chen and Chen, for both, he makes a formula book, he also makes a single herb book. So Chen is very concrete. He has some interesting side notes in there, but he's a pharmacist. Him and his wife are both pharmacists. Mm-hmm. So I like the concreteness that he provides. Bensky it's probably the same thing. Bensky is very specifically everybody's going to the wrong way. Bensky is very specifically, Renee, step out, yeah. So he expounds and he looks at the synergy of the herbs coming together. So all of that information I like to explore. Sometimes I also like to explore a particular medical condition and how a practitioner I like approaches that idea. And so the itmonline.com is Subhuti Dhamma something or another. Sorry, I forget his name. But I love his stuff. You have to step out when you do that. I can't. I can't hear. So I really like that he'll have an approach where he'll take something like costochondritis and explore it from both a medical perspective, but then look at some formulations and specific indications that may match your client from an energetic hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient excess, or from a Chinese perspective. And so those are probably my go-tos for most things. I'll sometimes open up Giovanni Macchioccia, that he has some diagnostic books that I really like, and I'll explore those if I'm having a hard time coming up with a reason why a particular symptom is there. And so that's always worked really well for me. From a Western herbal perspective, this is the same, I think, Renee. From a Western herbal perspective, I really enjoy the books by Energetics of Western Herbs by Peter Holmes. And Peter Holmes, people love him or hate him, but it allows me to understand the Western herbs, and he has so much information on the Western herbs in there. And looking at that through that energetic and Chinese lens. What I find is with that book, and it's a two-part series, or a two books collection, you really, really have to look a little bit further into it and not just read it and take it as a grain of, like, I accept everything that Peter Holmes says. No.
Which was several questions were like what you're saying.
And so I find that there's channels entered, or organs, or I think he uses the term tropisms that are affected by a particular herb, which is an odd word. So that could be a channel, that could be an organ, or a system. But also, he'll have like 8 indications for a single herb. I'll usually trust the top 3, but where the real golden information is he'll have a write-up at the end that gives dosing on whether it's an infusion, a decoction, a tincture. He'll give unique correspondences, historical facts. And so I love the depth and detail that he puts into those books.
Which was interesting, because one of the questions that I was going to hold for later, because it was a can of worms, so you don't have to speak on it, was what is your value personally? What is Bob Linde's value, Dr. Bob really is the way it was worded, to traditional medicine like African tomes, and that doesn't correlate at all with the clinical tomes we now get coming out? Like, how do you hold the value of traditional medicine on that? Not spiritual, but like the traditional herbal stuff.
So I think highly of it to a point. So my running joke that's not a joke is that give me double-blind placebo-controlled studies or 500 years of traditional use.
Which is the truth.
And I really love it when I see both, where we take something that's got a couple of hundred years of history or a couple of thousand years of history, and then we run that through the safety net of chemical analysis and so forth. And so a great example is comfrey. Comfrey has, thousands of years of history behind it. Probably since people first, used any herbs, comfrey was understood to be magical. And the problem is science has let us know that although it's a magical herb that continues to be used, that there are some new safety parameters that we've seen through science. That the PAs in there have the potential to cause harm to a pregnant woman. Dandy hotspot, so I am guaranteed.
It looks like I have like wonderful full bars too.
Yeah, I know. So, I'm going to switch to that.
Mhm.
So if you can still hear us. Da, da, da.
Yeah, we'll be there in a second.
We'll be right back, and I will continue to babble endlessly.
Yeah, it's on the. You can continue because it'll be on the recording.
Oh, that's true too. And I have no idea what I was saying.
We were just
so
talking about the
traditional
comparison.
medicine, I think, is great. Is my short answer on that. But I think there's too often we are.
Mobile hotspot.
Yes. That too often. No, that's not the way it works. Sorry. There we
There
go.
you are.
We're back. So too often we see claims about traditional stuff that the reality aren't correct.
Well, the
that
other thing is
people are
stuff,
making stuff up.
has changed in 5,000 years. Like you said, not only have we learned more about science, but the comfrey one's a good one because the argument you would get from the old timers was, well, if it was this comfrey, then it was good, and we don't know that comfrey to be there anymore.
Right, and I mean, but there's people who take these modern our modern understanding of something like cat's claw.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great example. Cat's claw is a phenomenal herb. It has a long history, traditional history for people in South America in the jungles. And our Western understanding of it is cat's claw has a long, safe history of use for things like viruses and arthritis. Well, viruses and arthritis is not part of the nomenclature or construct of a traditional culture.
Agreed.
We hear that about some of our superfoods, mangosteen, noni.
I agree.
Moringa.
What we turned it into is not what they originally intended.
And so in no form or fashion did 1,000 years ago did we understand things like arthritis and infections
Not
and
the way we do
viruses.
now.
And so they had an energetic system that they understood it, where I would use it for this type of hot inflammatory disorder, or this weak inflammatory disorder, or this cold inflammatory disorder. And so if we're going to utilize a traditional herb based on the traditional information from that culture, we need to make sure that we're not trying to make it fit into our modern medical construct.
And if
that
we do,
have,
use modern medicine to back
yes,
it up.
yeah, and then we need the research. But if we stop to try to understand the languaging of that traditional culture of ultimately all of them hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax, and I don't care whether you're looking at Ayurveda and Nani Tibbs, an African cultural construct, the Quechua or anybody else, those terms, that languaging will exist, and if we even get the most basic understanding of that through that energetic construct, then we can incorporate that appropriately. Otherwise, we're doing a disservice of a misappropriation and a horrible misunderstanding of their cultural uses.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'll add one more thing to it, and then we don't have to beat this dead horse.
And I will say, every time, I've traveled like volumes all over the world. Renee, and I have traveled and met people from all over the world. When we meet somebody with a traditional knowledge, we beg them to tell us not from what they think we want to hear from an energetic, from a medical standpoint, if this is good for colds and flu, but to tell me through their cultural construct that we have an understanding, cursory at best, but we do have a cultural understanding. And I remember when I was in South America with the Amu Paquin, with the traditional midwives down there, and I was trying to move them in a particular direction, and they were like, "Why are you giving me this tea, this herbal tea you gave me inside the gourd?" And they're like, "Oh, it's to make you sweat." And I was like, "Why do you want to make me sweat?"
Because it's good for Americans.
And so. We drive out the evil wind, and then her eyes lit up when it got translated for her, and she let me. Then she started to talk exponentially, because that same languaging of evil wind does exist within their construct. So that idea would give me a completely different understanding of why I needed to sweat at a particular time. And I think that's where we need to better utilize and understand. And when we do it that way, you will get better, exponentially better success than the poor translations of what diseases is it good for.
And the one thing I was going to say that was the last thing I was like, let's just add that and be the like, okay, I don't just say anymore, was we regularly accidentally make fun of muscle testing, and you know me, I believe in all kinds of things that other people would perceive as being crazy, and it's not that we're making fun of the muscle testing more than if it's provable. Like if you're muscle testing for parasites, you could easily prove that.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we want the science and the history with it? And so let's do that. It just gives a better foundation and more strength to our spiritual and our traditional medicine. Why wouldn't we want to prove it with a third body of the science?
Yeah.
And when the people push away from that, that's when there's a problem, because wouldn't you want all the proof in the world that this was correct and right? And so I think that you were right, that was the way to go, that we have different tools now, and that we can evaluate it from the old system and the new system and come up with a consensus. And
Yeah.
so that was a good explanation for sure for that. And so I think that was a great answer. And so we have a few medicine making things, which again.
Well, and actually, let me say that before
Yeah.
you resource books. Medicine Maker's Handbook is my standalone best book ever. Yeah, Renee's got it. We're getting ready.
Dog-eared and falling
Yeah,
apart.
you can tell this. We've gone through a couple of editions, and what's really nice, one of the few books that's inexpensive.
Get them used, but they're going to be dirty because they're adding a flavor, and they concoction, extract, or medicine that an herbalist give you, does that change the potency of the medicine somehow? Does that change the medicine? And these are beginner questions because
No, I
it's
think
somebody new answering.
It's a great question.
Yeah, and so how would you answer that?
Good. I was like, right now we have too much sweet and salty as a culture, and we need more bitter and sour in order to create a more balanced palate.
So
but
not
ultimately,
good or bad. Foods aren't good or bad.
yeah, it's like if we eat in an unbalanced way, then our body will become unbalanced. And so, if we are clearing heat out of the body, we're going to find lots of bitter herbs. If we wanted to, Shiza, it says I am currently offline.
There you are. You just got back on.
Okay, that would be bad.
Yep, you
I
are.
have a feeling that we are having some.
A lightning storm or something.
Yeah, we've had some lightning of late. So if we don't come back within a few minutes, that means we dissed you all and ran away. No, I think
Not
we're
really.
back online. So if we wanted to then not just clear heat out of the body, but we wanted to clear heat out of a particular part of the body, we could add a flavor. And so within the Chinese, and I think generally Western and Ayurvedic have a similar idea. If we add the flavor sweet, we're going to guide it to the digestion, spleen in Chinese. If we add sour, we're going to address the liver. If we add in salty, we're going to address the kidneys. We usually think of bitter as the heart, but I would argue it's also the liver. And for the lungs, we usually look at acrid, where things are either spicy or very aromatic. And so everything that we do to that formula, and honey, adding sweet into it, we talk about like, oh, is it Mary Poppins? A little bit of honey makes the medicine go down. Spoonful of honey makes the medicine.
Spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go
Yeah,
down.
and so that idea, and the Chinese actually add rock candy to their formulas, like that's written into their formula.
That's interesting, because when I'm watching those cooking things that I got you hooked on, she keeps throwing it in. I couldn't decide whether it was salt or sugar, and then they stir it around. It's rock.
It's rock.
Is it good storage? Is that why? Why do they do it that way with the big rock chunks?
Probably that.
Interesting.
You know, and so we have classical formulas where we add a teaspoon of salt, that we add vinegar, we add alcohol. So maltose is added in. There's all of those things are additives into a formula after you've decocted it. That we would add those in to alter and direct the formula for a particular purpose. And of course, that idea of powder, the processing where we honey fry things and so forth, will alter the medicine. And you know that if we heat something up, if we cook it with another substance, we are changing its chemistry and creating an alchemy of altering it. And will the medicine work without it? Yeah, probably. Will it work better if we practice the alchemy of each one of those herbs as in the traditional way? I would say it will work better.
We're talking about containers and storage of extracts and whatnot next. I didn't know if you wanted to try to hardwire that in or continue. The next question.
Say it, yeah.
So they wanted to know, just like with the flavoring, if you stored your herbs in a container, or if you stored your medicine, your extracts in a container, could it change the energetics, or would it change the energetics? Even like when I tell them to make the ice cubes and put them in the Yeah.
Boy, that's pushing a few people away.
Then I looked it up. I wanted to know what they were talking about.
It doesn't surprise me.
A famous doctor that's on ResearchGate that's like spewing off that's the favorite way to extract is in the microwave.
And you know, there's obviously people talk about like microwaving's evil, your food is dead, the nutrients are all vanished. And I don't know that we have research to back that up. I personally prefer not microwaving my food. And doesn't mean I haven't ever done it. And standing too close to a microwave, you are getting some radiation. And if you have
maybe that's the added value.
Yeah, right. Maybe we're imbuing it with extra warmth or energy. We are certainly exciting the molecules. That's the concept of it. That is how we create the heat. I don't know that I want my medicine cooked that way. I mean,
well, I think that he was thinking is that it was busting the molecules.
It's probably breaking it open, getting minerals in a better way. But like, you could put it in an atomic reactor that way too.
He actually referenced another ionizing sonic thing. I was like, what the hell is that?
I'm not sure I want my medicine made that way.
Well, it was under the guidelines of like the Celts putting out the stuff in the snow, and I hate to break it to everybody. It's not that mysterious. We needed
freezing.
Yeah, we needed preservatives, and they had
snow. I'll come back a little bit. Like,
okay.
I still believe that, you know, although we do use the magical butter machine to make a lot of medicine and so forth, that's still that is still a very classical way. We're just making it happen mechanically rather than us doing it, because my arm would get tired. But the reality is, I still think the best medicine is water extraction. I still think if we decoct our herbs or we long infuse our herbs, that's the best medicine I've ever worked with. And even though we may not be getting the right chemical constituent, that's the way it's been done for 10,000 years. It's just inconvenient these days. So I will, along those same lines, most herbalists and traditionally, herbs were stored if they were dried, or if they were already some sort of preserved liquid like a tincture.
They
were
stored?
Put in glass or an earthenware pot, and we generally think of non-reactive because there are minerals that are in there. And so if we're working with something reactive, the potential for it changing our medicine in a way we may not know or may not want is certainly there. And in the same sense, I would say I don't like reactive stuff and insert plastic. So Tupperware, plastic Tupperware, to store your herbs in long term may not be like, we know that there are things that leach out of plastics. I don't care if they're considered microwave safe or whatever
And
the
you
heck it is.
definitely wouldn't put a tincture or something in
Right,
there.
and so to put stuff in there, it is interacting with a reactive and something that's breaking down and potentially carcinogenic. Gonna say no. I'm gonna stick with glass
Things
and
of the earth.
yeah, glass, especially for long term. That said, there are supplement bottles that are a higher grade,
Like pharmaceutical or
yeah,
natural,
are plastic that
food grade.
I prefer that they're all glass, but it's funny, we have supplements that are glass, we have supplements
And
that
the
are a high
plastic,
grade
yeah.
plastic.
None of our tinctures though.
No, none of our tinctures. We won't put, but most of the things that you find in plastic supplement bottles have barriers. So if you think about it, you find pills inside of there. So they're a non-reactive, high-grade plastic that then there are capsules in there that are a cellulose barrier from the herb. Where if you look at something like the Innate brand, and I'm looking over our supplement shelf, the Innate brand, where we only that they would go right back to their earthen jugs that they think are perhaps inferior.
I agree with you that maybe that is the case 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So now, remember we started with the I'm like, these are basic questions from people who are new to herbalism. And we started with like, what are the books that you trust? Because I think this is hysterical. Like the question was, what are aerial parts? And they didn't mean what is aerial parts. They meant they've gotten conflicting answers for what an aerial part is.
Oh.
Does it mean everything in the air? Does it mean just the leaves? Does it mean the seeds? Does it mean this? Because that conflicts with what they've learned to make.
Yeah.
That aerial parts would go into infusion, but seeds don't necessarily.
Don't make
so
tea
what
well.
does what are aerial parts to us, and why would we exchange one way or the other? And I have so much
Well,
to say.
it's funny, like, because what Renee said was, like, we generally would say seeds don't make great infusions
but
unless
like
it's a very
vitamin
low.
seeds could probably be crushed.
And seeds generally need to be crushed or ground, but even then, because we're trying to use water to extract oils frequently, they're not always great. So I've never thought of this.
What are aerial parts?
But when we think of aerial parts, we usually then say anything that's above the ground we can use. But I would say the fruit or the seeds may be the exception to that. That although you could, and they're used for medicine, they might not be used for infusions. So infusions, I usually think of flowers, leaves, and stems, I guess you could put in there. But when we talk about the need for a decoction, we would look at maybe fruit or a,
I'm looking for mine now.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
We would look to seeds or fruit or bark. So when we're looking at a tree, the bark is going to be more likely decocted. So Renee's hard parts for hard problems, I would say hard parts. Oh no, don't go there or you'll lose our connection. Yeah.
All right. That's
the-
where it says to go.
The hard parts are for decocting or tincturing for that matter.
So do you think that if we
yes.
crush them appropriately, you could use them in an infusion?
You could, and I just put on there.
Because I was taught wise women practice, aerial parts are everything in the air.
And yes, I'd say that's true, but I don't think we've ever differentiated it. And, if I look at an oak tree, we can use all of the oak tree above the ground and probably below.
Well, the exception is that until the stem gets ready.
And so I think that maybe that wasn't well thought out, but yes, it can all be used for medicine, but how we process that medicine would depend on the part. I think that would be a safer statement.
Mm-hmm.
And can we still do it? Yeah, you're not going to die. You're not
Just not going to have
You're not
substantial-
going. You can't count on a viable amount of medicine coming out. We can improve the viability of that. We're like, yeah, screw that. I don't have a way to decoct it. I don't have time. I'm going to do an infusion, or I'm going to do nothing. I think in that case we can grind it as fine as possible that we're increasing the exposed surface area to the water, that we'll get a higher level of extraction from even our seeds and maybe our
It's
dried
interesting
fruits.
because one of the questions later on kind of deals with how do we make tinctures the same, and so that would be a problem. Like if we were half-assing it because the seeds aren't supposed to be in there, how do we know each time?
Yeah,
But,
like,
yeah.
I'm here to tell you, like swan cell wren, this is the jujube date seeds that we use for nourishing the heart blood, to calm the shen. I have on many occasions forgotten to crush the seeds. Technically, they won't work unless you crush the seeds.
But you've gotten good
It
reactions.
still works.
Yeah.
Doesn't work as well.
I know, but
And
I
so
also think
consistency
Mhm.
and
I think
so
when we
forth.
say stuff like that, our students in particular, like we're on a world platform,
I know.
think that we're magic, and that's
Yeah.
why they work. Yeah, like
So,
they're like, well, it worked for you
keep
and
talking
Bob.
because I want to go get the salve I made today because I want to talk about that.
Yeah,
Literally how
absolutely.
that's making.
So one of the things that comes up is this aerial part thing, and we were taught that I was taught, and we teach botany because of this, that if you start to get the woody part, that's the top of the air. That woody part is actually the part going into the ground. Now Bob's going to show you some medicine that he made today.
See which one.
Which, by the way, the apothecary manager, who is brilliant, and I both were like, "What the hell is that?" But like, look, just hold it up. There you go. It's this pink clay-like looking color. And then at the bottom, flip it to the bottom, you see a pocket of oil in it. The bottom of that one, you can see that pocket of
Oh, look
moisture
at that.
in there.
That's funny.
I didn't know if it was water because it trapped heat in when you poured it in.
Who
Yeah,
knows?
it looks oily though.
Yeah, it does.
That's crazy talk.
I know.
What's in there to make it that color?
So I'm gonna say I did not make a formula for one of my clients in a timely manner, and I was like, crap! I can't believe I had forgotten to make it. It was a topical salve for some stuff, and I was like, yeah, but I really need to get this topical formula out, and I break rules sometimes.
Oh my gosh, that is so laughable.
Every once in a while, I break the rules.
You have a sign a picture of you standing next to a sign that says "Don't do something." You're doing it next to the sign.
With another herbalist who's been
Yes.
known to break the rules.
Yes.
And it wasn't you.
No. No, I took the picture.
Yeah, that's right.
One of us had to stay behind.
That's right. And so we hear that we should never heat our oils. We should keep it below a certain temperature, and we're going to destroy our beeswax if we get it above 130 degrees, blah, 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 blah. And that's true. But when we're working with an herb, is the primary aim to have the medicinal action of the oil and the beeswax, or is the primary aim to get the medicinal action out of the plant matter that we've infused in this? And so I know, and this is going against everything everybody says and about what everybody knows, and we all preach, and I preach the same thing. The reality is we take that plant matter and we boil it in a decoction. We take that plant matter and we infuse it in hot water for an hour, and we think that's the best, strongest medicine there is. And there is value to the oil, there is value to the beeswax. But what if I'm trying to not heal a damaged tissue where the beeswax and the oil would be most beneficial, but I'm working for a hard lump that's underneath the skin? Mm-hmm. The role of the oil, the role of the beeswax is greatly reduced. And the importance of the plant matter that I put in there is exponentially higher.
Because you could use a tincture at that point to try to soak into the skin, like an alcohol, or we could.
But I
put it
wanted the
in
consistency of the
to stay on it.
to stay on, and the oil and
So
the
oil's
beeswax, the
just a
salve, to
transporter.
hold it
So
into
it's just a
place.
transporter at that point.
So
Yeah,
I hate to say this, but I made a formula and I dropped it in some oil and I boiled the shit out of it.
Yeah, no, it's not something you should be saying online right now. You've done that before and made a great medicine
Yeah.
too. Because
And-
if we're killing the oil, who cares? You're trying to make
Right.
the extract.
Yeah. And so that's the medicine I got out. I made this in an hour.
Because you didn't care about damaging that part.
Wasn't concerned with the oil.
Which was funny, it leads us to our next question.
Sorry, I know I've offended half of the world right
we have
now.
like 42 medicine making questions, so we can go to another
But-
topic, but the next question is relevant to what you just did.
Well, I was going to say, I was in a hurry in class once, and I was like, try this at home, kids. And I literally, somebody's like, hey, let's make a formula for varicose veins. And I didn't measure, I didn't write down the ingredients. I told them to, but I just threw some herbs that I pulled off the top of my head and put it in there. We made a tin for everybody because we were just demoing this. And they all came back like a week later and said, oh my God, you got to give me that recipe. This is the most amazing product I've ever used. To this day, I don't know what it is.
Okay, so Samaya's busting your chops about it. Do you see her? Is what she's saying?
High heat oil?
Yeah, so no, basically, Samaya, he fried the herbs.
I didn't boil it in oil, admittedly.
Oh, come on.
I stirred it constantly, and I used a combination of oils, honestly.
So you're right. You're not supposed to do that.
No, it's totally wrong. I don't care if it's a high heat oil. I don't care if it's saffron or safflower oil, which I did use some safflower oil.
Or coconut you go high on.
Yeah, and so I don't care. Like, you shouldn't boil your herbs according to everyone everywhere.
And so he's done that before, and it's been fabulous.
Yeah,
and not double boiler, like on the heat in the in the pan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's a thing. But he's right. If you're not trying to get the medicine of the oil and you just want the medicine, the herbs, it's the difference between infusion and decoction.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not.
And so no, totally that is wrong, and yet it works. And when I don't have days or weeks or months to make this formula, I needed this literally a week ago. What's better, to have this perfect preserved oil and beeswax that is cursory of importance to the process, or getting some medicine on this guy yesterday?
So I got to comment on something that Samaya said.
Oh, yes.
Because yesterday Jody asked me to do something.
Yes.
So Samaya, listen to this, because remember our senior
1,000
talk.
times better.
So Jody asked me yesterday, and Jody's an elder of ours. She asked me if she got this and got it to me.
And you should define Jody to the masses of the world.
So Dr. Noe, it's Dr. Jody Noe of Integrative Oncology and Integrative Family Practice. She's a wonderful doctor, midwife, activist, Cherokee.
Yes.
And so she was talking to me about a bear fat cedar medicine, and she asked me if she got me all the parts, would I do it? Because normally we're together and I set medicine. And I'm like, oh, of course, yes, do it. Let's do it. Send it to me after you and I just talked about the cedar. Mm-hmm. And she told me what to do, and it was not what...
Right.
It's more like what Bob's saying, that we should be boiling that down in the bear fat.
I didn't even go there, but classically, especially with
tallow,
all of the North and South American tribes, and I assume beyond that as
fat.
well.
Well, the boa constrictor fat we have.
That's why I said South America. So using animal fats, tallow, as a way to make your medicine. And we don't do that in the modern Western herbal realm very often. We have a few people do.
The next question. Wait till you hear.
And I know some of the best medicine I've seen have come from a variety of native tribes using bear fat or other animal fats.
That's what she said. She couldn't do it.
The bear fat was specific.
That's what she said.
And different animal fats were used for different processes. And then the cedar, I remember one formula I got from the Seminoles out west was juniper. Yeah,
the juniper
and one of the
berries.
best medicines I've ever seen for rashes.
That's what she wants me to make. She says it keeps the ticks off of them, and she's had Lyme several times.
So we
yes, Samaya,
we talk about traditional cultural things, but then we modernize it with our construct that somehow using the animal products is bad, and we now have altered the way we think and process the medicine and its action, because it does matter what we put in it. But I'm fresh out of bear fat, and we've over harvested the bears. And
some's a coming.
Yeah, and so we do.
Fresh out of bear fat.
I mix my metaphors, and I provide a loose construct to the traditional methodologies and what I've been taught with the books I respect, like the Medicine Maker's Handbook. I use those as guidelines, and I've been known to color out of the lines sometimes. And for convenience, for expediting, and the reality is, if your herbs you chose are correct, the medium of how you preserve it or administer it becomes less vital. Not to say it's not, And so I'm going to have a lot of negative comments
Well,
when the
I know,
masses
but
of the world
something
read all
good in
this.
means good out, like
Yeah.
your quality control. So
Yeah.
so you ready?
Yep.
You want something else?
Go for
So
it.
it goes along with what we were saying. Sorry to be medicine making crazy today, but that's the happening.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of that.
So if we're now in the age where about half, probably more of what we get are vegans. And so what do we do about the fact that our predominance for syrups and for salves are beeswax and honey? That what are your favorite choices? Because I will tell you what mine are not. And so I have something to say about this too, because oxymels, syrups, elixirs all would have like a honey or something in it. And a salve, obviously, what would we do for the wax? What would we do for any part that had to do with that? So do you have go-tos for making vegan applications?
Nah.
No?
I think
I can tell you easily what mine are if you want me to tell you.
I've definitely done it, sometimes out of convenience, but not always out of, occasionally out of necessity. I'll use any number of different things. But the reality is, there's two answers to this. Salves are convenient. They're
Yeah.
convenient for transportation. They're convenient way to apply them. You just do an oil. You don't have to harden it, because that actually, by adding the beeswax, the beeswax is not the medicinal. If
The
we're not looking,
emulsifier is not the medicine.
right? So we're actually diluting
The
our
paraffin.
medicine. Yeah, we're diluting our medicine by adding that in.
It's just a suspension.
Right, and so I would say just do an oil,
Well, 'cause
and they, you suck it up. If you're not willing to use bee poop, then you're going to be slightly inconvenienced. Or, so we can use any number of other ways to extract it. I've also done. You can use making a plaster. And so that's another way where we can.
Or a topical tincture in some way, like a plaster. is a
Right.
topical,
So
yeah.
you can use something like baking powder, or baking soda, in order to make it.
Maybe even Epsom salt.
I've not tried Epsom salts, but cooking it down into a thicker substance and adding a thickener to it, and we can use any number of different
Just
thickening.
literally decocting it down to a sticky mass.
And then throw arrowroot in as a thickening agent, then putting it into a cloth, and now we have a plaster.
Well, I'll tell you from the standpoint of I grew up making all my stuff, like growing as like my soap and stuff. Every fat emulsifies, so you can get it whipped up. If you added slippery elm, marsh, arrowroot, tapioca, you could get it into a suspension.
And I would argue that or just give them an oil.
Yeah.
Or they can boil up a decoction and then apply it
but
as.
the second side of that was the honey, so
Yeah.
not a topical. So if you were what would be your thing for an oxymel, an elixir?
I'm not a fan of sugar, but throw some sugar in there, or suck it up. It's going to be
Molasses
yucky.
and maple.
Molasses,
and
yeah.
maple for mineralizing,
Yeah.
helping us lock in things like yellow
But
dock usually go with molasses.
In the case of molasses, if we're trying to increase mineralization, then yes. But remember, if we are not working on mineralization, let's say we're making elderberry syrup and we didn't want to add honey to it, then you just drink some elderberry. Make a decoction. And there's so many of these things we do. We want to make it palatable for children. We want to preserve it. We're whiny. Yeah, stop being whiny. It tastes bad. It's freaking medicine. Suck it up.
No,
You could give echinacea to an infant and they'll take it if they want to be well.
I don't know if the person hadn't been exposed to something like a glycerite yet. But I hate glycerin.
I hate glycerin. It has an
Right.
energetic property. It warms it up. It changes your medicine.
So I can use a teensy amount of a first run.
I obviously am not going to have anybody bring their children to me
No,
ever again.
I can have a tea. I know, but you're right though, because the herbal children eat dirt. If we start feeding our kids the right thing at birth, then it's not a weird thing. They'll just take it. But
So meeting people where they are, if they're telling you that animal products are not okay, then we should clarify whether that includes things like honey and beeswax. And if they're not okay, then we're going to give them
I
an
know
oil.
with this class I have right now, more than
Yeah.
half of them, honey is not okay.
And that's cool.
And so I have to be careful. I have to leave out options like maple.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's, or for some religious reasons, the honey is
Yes,
not okay.
there's like, I have a number of animal products that are not considered okay. The oyster shell, I have one person who considers that not
Centipede.
okay. Yeah, centipede's not okay with a lot of people. So, you know, the deer antler, there's so many things that are either for religious persons or for ethical reasons, people will consider not an appropriate thing. But then we have 1,000 different ways of administering our medicine. And going back to that traditional method of take these herbs, throw in a pot, boil them up, and you can drink it, you can put it on.
But it was from a medicine making standpoint of like, how do I replace that? So a first run A-grade maple syrup or molasses does fine.
Is an option.
Yeah,
yes.
and for the thickening, any of our thickening mucilaginous things like marshmallow or arrowroot or tapioca also
you
would
know,
help to emulsify
your
fat.
creativity is this is the
Sunflower lecithin.
we can view this as a roadblock to medicine. Oh my God, this is such a pain. I don't want to do it.
Or it's how fun
And-
it is.
But I would say, like, one of the first products I was ever hired to formulate for somebody for a commercial operation, I wanted to meet everybody's needs. I wanted to make sure it was vegan and so forth, because I recognized that the audience is broad. And then looking at thickening agents and going through then what thickening agents are appropriate, because some are actually inflammatory in their nature and they're energetically hot or cold when we look at glycerin and its warming nature. So I think it's important that we look at how the product's going to be used, who the product is being made for, and then research the crap out of it. That thickening agent is diluting your product, and it is changing it, and it can be inflammatory. When we look at, I think I ended up using xanthan gum, honestly, as my thickener. What's the one that they've had in all the toothpaste that comes from a seaweed?
Oh, yes.
It's literally, when I researched it, I can't believe I can't think of what it is. It was being used to test on.
Xylitol?
No, that one's creepy in its own right. They were actually using it to create inflammations on animals to test products. And so this thickening agent was actually inflammatory in its nature. And it was in half the products out there for a food. It was considered a food grade thickener.
I know, but for me in particular, when I use maple or use molasses, it's for a medicinal reason.
Yeah,
Like I switch it
and
to
that's
that,
fine.
and it's a small amount
Yeah.
for sure.
All right, what's the next question?
Okay.
Enough of this ranting.
So do you want to?
I'm causing trouble
there's
today.
Several medicine making ones. Do you want to continue on this line for a
Sure,
little
what
bit?
the hell? If you got something different, we can dump on that.
We can go back and forth, but
Yeah.
I thought some of them were very, very relevant and stuff that we would argue about as well. Why are there different steep times? There was a question of why are there different steep times and why are there different decoction times? She doesn't understand why reads in one book one and one book the
that's
other
great.
as the thing. So I thought that was
That's a really good question.
I picked ones that I thought
So,
people think
you know,
about.
and these are great because they're appropriate for both Renee and I, and would probably disagree on some of those. There's generically, I'll come from the Chinese perspective first, and then I'll talk
That's
from
why
the
I
Western.
thought it was important because it's different.
So, in general, the Chinese don't do a lot of infusions, which is interesting. They do powders you toss in your
But
mouth
they
with some
drink
tea.
tea.
Yeah, and they actually don't take the leaves out.
Yeah.
So
Tea.
with most of our herbs, we either grind them into a powder, make them into a pill, or just toss them in our mouth. We'll put them in hot water and just drink them back the second you're able to drink it. But most things are talked about from a decoction where we boil them, and there's a set process. And I'm going to generically say, I'll contradict myself later. We basically simmer it for an hour, and there's a nuance to all of that. My Chinese students know this now. But that's a shorter answer than trying to describe the whole process. But, and actually I almost need to because it'll make sense of why the different times. We add certain substances, our aromatic substances, our delicate things like a mint, for instance. We would add those in either in the last 5 minutes, and these are specified classically in our textbooks. They're added in the last 5 minutes so we don't lose those volatile oils, the minty smell, the things that make them special, because that's part of their action. Those volatile oils are what helps to create the diaphoresis or release exterior. We have other things that are dissolved, like gelatin, jiao, lu jiao jiao.
So it has to reach a certain temperature.
And so we need to melt it in there, but the heating of it might destroy it. And things like sugar.
So you take a
maltose.
long time at a lower heat versus short
So
time.
no, we actually decoct it. When we strain the herbs out, then we add that gelatin or
Okay.
that salt, and there's salts that we use and minerals and so forth. Those are added at the end. Other things that we have to, like bones, shells, rocks, are added an hour or two beforehand and boiled before we even add the main herbs, the roots and barks that we use. And there's another reason why we increase that cooking time. Ginseng is a great action. So ginseng is one where it's really freaking expensive. Like, you can 100 years ago you could have spent $1,000 on like this 100-year-old ginseng. And so it is classically thought that heating does not destroy any of the constituents. So in order to get our money's worth, literally, we would boil that or simmer that for an hour, again, before we add the other herbs. They actually have special ginseng cookers where you would cook that separately for an hour or two and then add that into your decoction while everything else got
Just to
cooked.
make sure to maximize.
Make sure we
it?
get all the good stuff out of that.
What would be our Western equivalent of those kind of things, like barks and seeds?
And so certainly we would say to decoct our barks and seeds, our roots, like we would decoct those. We talk about the volatile oils, like if we're making mint tea, we're making chamomile, those gentle things, we're going to cover them, but we don't want to drop those into boiling water. We would
I
recognize
thought it was
that.
important that you said that to show how the whole day ties together, because you
Yeah.
started with you must have an aromatic.
Yeah, right.
And then you're saying,
But-
but don't do, like.
But it's funny, and maybe we don't clarify it necessarily in class, but if we're using delicate things, leaves and flowers, we tend to do a shorter infusion.
yeah.
If we're
I do talk about
if we're
this a lot.
trying to open up the cell wall, we're trying to soak the cell wall in hot water or decocting it, but if it's just an infusion, we want this cell to swell with fluids and ultimately burst open so that the nutrients and especially those minerals are released out of that. So when we talk about nettles and chickweed and alfalfa, where we want those minerals in there, we look at those as mineralizing, that we're helping people with reduced absorption when they've got the low stomach acid. They're showing the cramping legs, nervous system dysfunction. We want that mineralization to help that nervous system work better. Those need longer for that cell to swell. We're not as interested in the volatile oils on that. And it's funny, like at this point, if anybody who's ever worked in the apothecary with me, I use almost the same directions on every formula or herb formula.
Yeah,
What I do,
we have a
what
system.
it's different from what you do, and
But
so
it's similar.
it's
Like
similar.
Yeah.
So generically, I always hate to say this because I break this rule all the time. I use more leaves and flowers and infusions. If I'm giving somebody Western herbs, I do more roots, barks, dried fruits. I do more decoction for my using Chinese herbs. And there are roots and barks I will add to my Chinese formulas, and there's some leaves and flowers I add into my Western formulas. And I base that just on what I think patient compliance will be. And sometimes I prefer the Western herbs, frequently actually. I think I make probably as many, if not more, of the Western infusions than I do decoctions for folks. And I generically do 1 or 2 rounded tablespoons in 2 to 3 cups of hot water, steep for 20 minutes or longer. But there's usually, I'm not looking for the aromatic properties. I'm looking for the mineralization and some of the other constituents in there.
And you guys have such a protocol because you take them to the outside of the bag, like you literally separate them if you are looking for that. Yeah.
And so if I wanted to do a mint tea, I might do lemon balm and so forth, a mint. I'm looking more for the aromatics out of that. I might do a shorter steep. I might use more plant matter, shorter steep, just because I want that smell and the taste to come out. But even for diaphoretics, release exterior, I'm likely to go longer and stronger. I want the bitter aspects with some of the aromatics. I mean, I want to preserve the aromatics, those volatile oils. But a lot of times I want the intense bitter
funny. Yeah, because I'll go to
of
tincture.
chamomile. I want the yarrow flowers, the elder flowers. I want that to be thick and resinous and make you sweat from that. But some of those preserved volatile oils. In a perfect world, would I do chamomile is a great example. I can use that as a knock you unconscious carminative with the bitter and the resinous, or I can use it as a little bit lighter diaphoretic. So I could do hour-long steep and then add in some more for both constituents to preserve more of the aromatics. Who's going to take the time for that?
That's why I'm saying, like, yes, I'll just go to a tincture for that, because if I tell somebody to decoct it properly, they won't. And so I just will forget it and just go to the tincture.
So, so my, in general, we use more roots and barks in the Chinese. And so we tend to do more decoctions with those. But there's some of both. And the herbs of commerce, it's funny, there's the herb of commerce and then there's the other parts. And so when we get further and further in on our own studies, when we see other textbooks, the herb of commerce might be the root, but then the local uses of the flower or the leaf, because it's easier to be more conservative. So for a milder disease, we might use the gentler parts of the leaf and flower. So there is more of it, and I would say we see more of the aerial parts, the softer parts, the leaves and flowers. We see more in home care medicine, in personal
first stage medicine.
Yeah, the personal medicine garden that every family in a traditional culture in China or South America might have. Or it's we go out and pick locally in the local field. That medicine is likely to be faster. It's aromatic, it's leaves, it's flowers, and more acute.
Likely to be the original medicine, like spit poultice.
Yeah, and when we look at when you went to go, like the difference between
to the doctor,
mommy, my belly hurts, or grandma, come help, I'm having a baby, where we would use that more local medicine, the difference between that and going to a healer, and that exists traditionally as much as it does, in the formal clinical practice here. That person was looking at chronic care, serious diseases, physical and spiritual, and had to address a wider range of complex disorders, like anything from a piranha bite to a worm infestation to a demon possession to kidney failure. And so they're more likely to either have dried or prepared stuff that would store in the earthen jars and so forth. Or if we looked at the European healers with alcohol, they had alcohol and
I
extraction.
also find that, like, along that lines, if we need to quickly peel a symptom off, then to make a decoction. So you can use a peppermint tea to pull a fever off, where you're then going to make the thing to kill the germ. Yeah. That's like, because it's quick medicine, because the infusion, you just need a little warm water or a spit poultice while you're going to the next thing. And so it's an interesting, because that's the same thought process as what you're saying, 100%.
And it's always funny, like you all see a piece of the clinic behind us, like literally.
It looks insane.
In the picture, you see one wall. There's another wall almost that size to this side of me. There's powdered concentrate and pre-mades on another wall back here. And then for the less commonly used stuff, there's a back room that's got about half as much of this again. So this is
A lot.
our commonly used stuff here directly behind us that you guys can see online. So that's overwhelming. It's intimidating because you have too many choices. There was the really, when it comes down to it, and I would say a good herbalist goes, what have I got? How would I make this work?
Yeah.
And that is what's growing out front.
And then can you manipulate it by decoction?
and then
versus
how do we
infusion
manipulate
versus
it?
spitballs?
Yeah.
I
And-
agree. So did we ever give this answer? Did we give an
I don't even remember what the hell the question was. I'm just talking
Why are there
smack.
different infusion times?
Yeah. So actually, yeah. Let me. So a lot of it depends on the plant part and the intention of it. If we want volatile oils, it's a shorter time, all the way through to. I would say if we want to open up the cell walls and extract the
So if it's an
mineralization.
aerial part where you want something that smells good, and I'm
Short.
things like peppermint, you want short and lower temperature.
Yes.
If it's a harder part and you want to break open a cellulose
So
or get
like
to something
we
that's hard,
need the iron out of the yellow dot. Then we gotta
which is a rock.
soak
Gotta
it or
choose
cook it longer.
Yeah.
And then if we really need to break it down, think mushrooms, think bones, think minerals. Now we need to boil it for hours.
Yeah. Okay.
And so and that's a spectrum without any perfect answers, and you have to look at the importance and predominance of a particular thing in your formula of which direction we go. In the same way we look at different proof alcohol to extract different things. There's never a right answer. It's it's your ability to form your own opinions based on your experience. But wait, I have no experience. That's why we have a student clinic, for you to fart around and get it right. And I would say I learned all of my stuff, I shouldn't say that. I learned much of my stuff not going to formal classes. No, go to formal classes. I learned a lot. When it came to what I want to do with my medicine, it was me
trial and error.
Trial and error, going home and being a mad scientist. And I would taste a little bit of every formula that I put out for the first 5 years of practice. Actually, in school and in practice. I always, if I made it a powdered concentrate, I was like, I wonder how crappy this is. And I take a little bit and I go, oh, they're going to
Very
hate
crappy.
me. And so, Renee makes fun of my ability to smell or taste an herb and come up with all kinds of crazy
Totally.
action. It's because I constantly tried to understand those herbs by tasting them and smelling them and paying attention. How does this feel in my body? What does this do in my body? And then how can we manipulate that with a water extraction, a long or a short infusion? How does a decoction change its taste and its action? Literally spend a day with one plant and 20 different types of extraction and taste and smell and see how it feels different in your body. You'll know that plant better than anything else you've ever seen.
Okay, so you get a choice because we have a half an hour.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of medicine making questions, some very basic things, and then I have a Chinese approach to chronic tension headaches or a fatty liver diagnosis. And so you can decide, I can go through formulation, I can go through standards, the comparison between pharmaceuticals or not. There's several basic questions, but I know you have a lot to say about it. So you want me just to keep going with the list?
Yeah, just.
How do you choose the best alcohol for tinctures? What is your decision making on proof or kind? Do you want to skip that and go to something else?
Yeah, that's in the Medicine Maker's Handbook, and that's out there.
Well, this one
depending on
is
your
too, but it's
constituents.
something that we say all the time,
Yeah.
and this makes me think that our students don't know what I'm
And-
talking
and
about.
actually, I'll say quickly on the alcohol. It's expensive and challenging sometimes to get very high proof alcohol, the 195, that's frequently talked about. But that's not always right, because that's 100. You assume that's 100% alcohol. Generically, 99.9% of the time, I work with 100 proof, which is half water and half alcohol.
So you're
which
getting two extractions.
you get
Yeah.
the best of both worlds. But if you're focusing on a particular chemical, then we can go ahead and do that. I prefer tincturing not in singles but in formula. I think there's a synergy and a magic that happens when we put all those herbs into a bucket and then we pour our booze on there, or we pour our water on there.
Lots of our
process.
elders think that.
And so the idea of doing singles and then blending those little singles together, I don't think is as good. It's a subtle difference and really a personal opinion.
But from a clinical practice, if you were setting up your own thing, it would be correct to have some singles.
It's a better business model to have a number of singles, and then we can create a wider array of formulas. I like here, because our students have made so many cool formulas and we have some base formulas that we like to use, like bitters and so forth. I'll oftentimes take a pre-done formula that I need to adjust and add a little bit of a single. So we have the single extractions.
That's why I like the powders.
Right. So I'm able to add a little bit of
whatever to
yeah.
make the energetics correct.
Yeah. I can add a little hint into it.
What do you care about kind
Of alcohol?
Because I know that I say to our students about, like, I really think it's an added value to use a spice rum for a respiratory infection because of all of the carminatives and diaphoretic action that the spice rum would give.
And I haven't done that much, although rum is a classic in the Caribbean as medicine, as is beer, oddly enough. And so,
like, wait, you gotta define beer, because are you talking about grog? Like what are you
no,
talking about?
that's watered down rum. When I was down there, so both for ceremonial spiritual practices, rum was used as much as flower water was. The agua de
no
flora.
joke with that.
Yeah,
I
and it
forget.
stings.
No joke for that. So to get ready for our healing the last time down in South America, he stuffed a bunch of fresh jungle ginger into rum to spit on us the next day.
Yeah.
So and not only that, like blinding rum, like they made.
It's 170. Oh my God, overproof. They use the overproof.
Overproof.
Yeah, it's like 170, 175. It's not on every island. It's more in the West Indies than it is in the Bahamas, but we used to have overproof as well. So that was used for both spiritual and kind of tincturing, because vodka was not as common. We didn't have potato farms there. We had sugarcane farms.
Well, that's the argument I always give to students. Wherever you came from, that's what you would have used.
And then add to that, we would use the white rum, not the dark rum. And the argument was that there were already constituents taking up space in this.
I agree with that.
And so things like a whiskey has more stuff.
There's only a certain point of salinity,
a certain amount of dilution that we can go into it. And so, Jägermeister already has a lot of stuff in it. We can't put more stuff in it.
Right,
so I don't use Jägermeister to break it down.
I can see a fighting with me about that, yeah.
Wine has chunky stuff in it. Even if it's been filtered, there's not enough room for us to...
Only so much absorption.
So,
agreed. So white rum has less?
Presumably.
What's a white rum? Like Bacardi?
There's different brands have white and dark.
I'm such a good girl.
It's differently
I'll
processed.
tell you about all the mushrooms you want to know about, but the alcohol.
So I generally, because of availability and cost, I tend to use vodka. It's the least reactive. It doesn't seem to affect sugar levels as much. But classically, the alcohol of your region was probably the primary one. But vodka is most often talked about when we made that medicine. So down in the Bahamas, it was definitely rum. So beer was an interesting thing, and this was probably a more modern construct, or maybe it came from the pirate medicines of days of yore.
Days of yore, huh?
But so down in the Bahamas, I learned a lot of my Caribbean medicine down there. It was fascinating. There was a couple of repetitive things that we saw. Every acute issue and half the chronic issues was after you did your medicine, after they beat you with whatever, you go jump in the ocean. And so that idea of, we didn't call it Olympia, we didn't call it a cleansing, there was no explanation
Starting
why.
Over fresh.
But you always went and jumped in the ocean, and that was considered cleansing. That was a place of comfort and salvation. It was where we got most of our sustenance from, and we saw that as a place that cleans us off from a physical standpoint. I don't think we really talked about it from a spiritual standpoint, but it certainly was. But if you've ever tried simmering beer,
It's gross.
in particular your dark beers. Now remember the Bahamas was a British colony up until the
So
early
it's a
1970s. So we things like Grolsch from the I think it was from the Netherlands. We had Guinness were very, very popular beers. When I was down there, we didn't have a Bahamian beer. The Kalik wasn't there yet. That's our local Bahamian beer. All the microbrews didn't exist, and so kind of we had a few British beers, but the Guinness and the Grolsch were kind of the medicinal beers. That Guinness was good for you was a campaign slogan for the company. And it was thought to be high in lots of minerals and iron. It was given
It's
to
probably pretty good
women who were birthing their
Yep,
baby
yep.
to replenish
Make
them.
milk and-
It was
yeah.
compared to a loaf of bread and its nutrients
Yep.
plus some. And so either of those beers, which were very dark stout beers, you would simmer and sometimes throw herbs in those. And that was a type
Huh.
of decoction. You would drink it as fast as you could, sweating. And
Warm? You drink it warm?
yes, drink it warm. And
Gross.
then you went and jumped in the ocean.
And drowned and got eaten by a shark.
Yeah, so you're half drunk, ready to vomit from the horrible ambrosia that you were forced to drink.
It's the purging.
And so there was a level. It sometimes caused you to purge, especially if you were doing the ragweed, the
Yeah.
ambrosia or the bitter melon. There's so many of those horrible bitter herbs were put into the beer, but the beer itself was part of their medicine, and the heating of it probably got a lot of the alcohol off, so you weren't getting drunk, but act as a level of extraction to it. And because of those chunky constituents that were used in the brewery process, the brewer's yeast and so forth, there was a diaphoretic aspect to that along with it all. So
Okay, so Samaya wanted to say, I'm telling you, you got 20 minutes.
yeah, choose the important
So
ones.
Samaya wanted, no, I'm going to do this one because she's on and listening, so we're going to answer this if you want to. Talk about formulation from a Chinese or in Chinese perspective. Like this, how to formulate, what are we looking at, yada yada.
Go back and review your second class.
Oh.
And the introductory chapter of both your single and your formula book. So,
But do you want to talk about that or no?
you know, we can a little bit. The nice thing about Chinese medicine is the formulation and the structure is very clear and very much provided for us. So we look at that hierarchical kind of system where we
Hey,
look
I've sat through the class a lot. I don't remember that either.
second class.
I know, but I don't remember you talking about formulation.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, chief herb, deputy, yada yada.
Yeah,
yada.
but that's not.
That's how we formulate. And our formulas, then it's about adjusting those formulas rather than creating. We don't create a lot of new formulas in Chinese. We use that's the joy of
So it's
Chinese.
just modification?
It's modification, yeah. And so, and those modifications are usually pre-programmed to us. We're not stuck. We're not limited to the suggestions at the end of the formula. They are common adjustments and suggestions. We can do whatever the heck we want. We give dosage range, and the dosages are adjusted based on the hot, cold, wet, dry deficient axis. So that's the nice thing. There's also, well, I spent a couple hours on this.
That's why I said you only
that
got 20 minutes.
because we've got those categories of chief herbs, deputies, assistants, the ministers, they use some weird hierarchical government communist terms, no. But the envoy, things like that, whatever. But the concept that I like to work with, especially if we are creating formulation on our own, if we're doing some less typical adjustments into our formulas, or trying to understand the formula beyond that, it's basically the Chinese were doing the triangle a long time ago. We just didn't have a triangle, we just had a structure. That the duiyao, the pairings. And so I like to look at those formulas as groupings of pairings for specific purposes. And that's how we start to look at that combination. But I'll say that there's a number of things that we look up, and you'll see me talk about it all the time in clinic as well in class, those foundational formulas. So when we're looking at the tonic formulas, what is the basic 4-herb formula that we use as a chi tonic? So all of our chi, if we look at Sejunzatong, 90% of all of our chi nourishing formulas have that at the foundation, and then we add some other herbs, other pairings of herbs, we add on to that to create these new formulas. It's only partially mysterious. The same is true as Siwutong when we look at our foundational blood nourishing formula.
You see our comment of, oh yes, the pairings.
Yes, that pesky crap. You even had that in Western. But then we also have some combinations that if we look at the blood moving category, because we can do this in the things that are excess as well. So if we have blood stagnation, the formula is the Zuyutong grouping of family, the family of herbs. There's knowledge in that, and I don't know if you've done that category yet, but our blood invigorating herbs. The Zuyutongs use this base 4 herbs that is in every formula that we want to move blood in. But then they guide them to the head, to the chest, to the shoulder and extremities, to the abdomen, to the lower abdomen, to the lower extremities. And the herbs that they've added into those base formulas give this, they allow us to understand how to move a formula around the body. So we can take that same grouping of herbs that they moved to those various parts of the body and put those into a chi moving formula, a blood nourishing formula, a chi nourishing formula. So within some of these formulas are secrets to success to understand how to get creative and play with those formulas. So I don't want you to just memorize every freaking formula and vomit it and repeat it back to me, because that's, I think, the problem with a lot of Chinese herbalists.
I like that.
They are a guideline, and they do simplification for some common issues. Things like the free and easy one or the Shaoyuan, those base formulas, the Le Jinzatong, Lu Wei Di Huang Wan, Zhibai Di Huang Wan. These are some classic formulas. We hand them out like candy canes. And they're super, super common and super effective. But the magic, the art of herbalism comes from understanding some foundational concepts and our ability to manipulate those into these beautiful ways to make some really obscure disorders come together. And I'll give you an example. I just created a formula today. I was in a formula making mood today. Somebody came to me, and there's a genetic disorder, I forget what it is, where the breastbone is kind of caved in, and it can be very painful. They have a hard time getting a deep breath. And he was like, can you make a formula so it's less painful and helps to like improve that a little bit? And I was like, I've never been asked to do that before. And it's congenital, but congenital is kidney, and this is a bone and structural issue. So I was like, how do I guide something to the chest? How do I have a long-term, not painful formula? What does that look like? Is it a costochondritis, which is inflammation of the tissues between the ribs? And I couldn't even find a good formula that was appropriate. Like, yeah, I treated costochondritis,
not long-term, like
but not.
that.
It's usually stress.
Energetic change,
yeah.
Or an injury, or you aggravated.
So I looked at what guides to the chest, what helps improve lung function.
How did you know that? How do you know what guides to the chest?
It's long history. I just looked it up.
So I'm saying, does it say it in a certain term in your book?
No, we teach that, and
so it's just from knowing your plants.
If you know your herbs,
okay.
and it's
that
in
was
the,
a question
it's
that
in,
came up.
Yeah, it's in the textbook. It will tell you this guides to this place, and this guides to this
So each herb in your textbook will say.
Some do.
Okay.
So, what the
nerds among us, that was important.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be my next class that I teach at the American Herbalist Guild conference, because I forget who it was brought that up in class the other day. Ashley, yeah.
He was a good student.
And I was like, I need to teach that class of that concept of
she
dieting.
asked if there was a book somewhere.
Yep,
We're like,
doesn't exist. Another book I got to write that I'm never going to do. So
Clear, erase, and delete that.
So I came up and I scratched my head and banged my head against the desk a few times, and I thought about the herbs that guide to this area. So we have two: Dan Shen, which is the red salvia mitts, We have Jigong, guides to the lungs, so we say that it guides to the chest
balloon
as
flower?
well. Balloon, yeah, Japanese balloon flower.
Like
Good job.
good?
So I put a small dosage of both of those because they're not strong, like
Just
dangerous,
to push
but
that way.
I want to guide what I came up with. So
Did you consider that to be synergistic, a base, a guider or supporter? A guider.
guide, yeah.
So it'd be in the guiding,
And then
activating
I
area.
thought about the tissues, and so because of we're trying to breathe, we're fighting against the malformation of this chest structure, that the ends of the ribs where they connect into the breastbone, that those tissues aren't moving, they're becoming inflamed because we're breathing constantly. So I thought about that for a minute, and I was like, what's safe, what's long term, what can I use kind of as a heavy hitter? And so I went with Gotu Kola and used that for its inflammatory connective tissue, because that costal chondritis area is connective tissue, how it connects into the breastbone.
It's got a web and a central node
Yep.
too, so that would be
So
like
that
the
became
webbing,
one of my chief herbs, was Gotu
That's a
Kola.
good one. And it's
Safe,
food.
long
It's food
term,
for
it's
people.
food.
Yeah.
I looked at Linde, the reishi
Yeah.
mushroom. Again, focuses on the heart and the
And
chest,
circulatory.
but helps with the oxygenation of the blood and the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood cells. So I put a little bit of that in just as a supportive role. And
What was your other one?
I forget.
Okay.
It was either Gusui Bu or Shu Duan, and I honestly don't remember which one it was.
You need to go to cola.
Yeah, right. And so I brought together a couple of others, and I think that's all I did. I thought about the energetics of the individual I was giving it to, because I
Okay, so
saw
let me
him as
ask
well.
you something about that, because
So-
remember this.
Lots of Chinese herbs, no formula to support it,
That's
made
what I was.
shit
That's
up.
what I was going to say to you.
And so I looked at the energetics, the actions, and the pairings, and how I can put those together to create a cohesive formula. And so that was, if we understand those foundational concepts, we can play, adjust, and create the way we do in Western herbal medicine. But we don't have enough foundation sometimes to really create that mastery level, because we killed the people who knew the traditions, and we've recreated
So I was
on a
going to
daily
kind of bust
basis.
your chops a little bit about like Chinese medicine can cure anything. So what happened there? And it was just that.
And maybe I just don't know the formula.
Like it lost knowledge.
Yeah, and I
or
did some
taught-
quick research. Admittedly, I had an hour.
or not for long-term use, and it was specific for long.
Yes, if he complained of chest pain,
Because
there's
we
a
would've
1,000
changed
classic
it.
formulas.
And then we would have changed it as he went on.
But I was trying to support an issue. We're not going to pull his breastbone out and restructure his body. So how do I support him with this congenital
Yeah.
issue was what I was attempting to
Okay.
do. And I have no idea how it's going to work. I literally made that up this morning. He'll pick it up tomorrow. And I'll
Okay.
find out soon enough. And actually, his wife is an herb student, so I'm quite sure I'll hear whether I just killed the poor guy.
So we have 10 minutes.
What else you got?
So much. This is a basic question, but I know you have a lot to say about it. Do herbs affect pharmaceuticals when taken together?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. How do we?
It's funny. This has come up a lot in the last few weeks.
Well, because the other ones that I thought you might want to go to are Chinese approach to the chronic tension headache, or Chinese approach to what's considered to be a fatty liver.
We'll do headaches if we get a chance, but I would,
Okay, so
herb-drug interactions is one of my favorite
so that was a
subjects.
series of 3 questions that maybe it will
Okay.
just come all the way
Yeah, yeah.
around, which were: do you think Chinese herbs are better than other herbs? Do you know? How do we know when you formulate with Chinese herbs that you're going to get the same thing over and over and over? And do herbs affect pharmaceuticals, and how are the pharmaceuticals different than the herbs? Like, how do herbals different from pharmaceuticals? And
Okay.
so any one of those that
Okay.
was in the same pocket.
Well, see, now I want to start with, I don't think Chinese herbs are better than Western.
It was literally voiced that way, better
I
than
know.
other herbs. Yeah.
So I don't think they're better than other herbs, but I think the system is more stylized because they didn't destroy the knowledge. We can look at the original textbooks that were written literally 5,000 years ago. So that system and both this system of diagnostics and energetics, I think, is I won't say superior, but there's less lost knowledge and there's greater depth, and it continues still to grow and add to that knowledge, that body of knowledge. The formulations, because they have 1,000+ years of history for most of them, and they are streamlined to fit beautifully into this unaltered system that's thousands of years old, I think that's superior. And I don't say that lightly. The herbs, no. There's nothing special because it grows in China. If anything, that's an anti-special. I think the Western herbs, our local herbs, our Caribbean herbs, our South American herbs, everything we need is there in that environment, in that community that we need for medicine. But too much of that information's been lost, and it hasn't been served. The cultures have been lost. They've been murdered. They've died out from disease. The traditions aren't being passed on. They haven't been passed on for I hate to say it. As we see the expansion of European culture and the colonization and subjugation of so many communities, that the knowledge from 1500 on has been destroyed at an exponential rate. And because so many of these cultures did not have written languages, it was not preserved. And even when we look at the European culture, because we destroyed the people who were the herbalists as heretics, that knowledge had to be put underground and frequently lost. That millennia of knowledge has been lost, and the Chinese and somewhat Ayurvedic, it's been preserved. The Tibetan medicine has actually been preserved. But like even when the English basically destroyed India, and the Ayurvedic practitioners had to grab their books and their scrolls and flee to the neighboring countries, and because the belief that the modern stuff from Europe was somehow better. And so now we see they're bringing that stuff back, but so much of it has even been bastardized. So yes, all medicine is good. We just have to understand it in some construct of either tradition or science. But goes then to the question of the pharmaceuticals. I think it is vital to understand that. And please go on our YouTube channel, Tradition School of Herbal Studies on YouTube. And I've got 2 and 3 hour lectures on that are available for free, because I think it's so important. They do affect pharmaceuticals. There isn't enough research on it. There's a few things like St. John's wort, where there has probably been more research on St. John's wort and its potential positive and negative effects on drugs, and unfortunately negative effects on things like birth control. Don't forget that. But what I generally say, I do not live in fear of pharmaceutical drugs and herbs, but I am either extremely cautious or I won't use them with what's called narrow therapeutic margin drugs, i.e. things that if you get too much or not enough, bad things happen. Think seizure medication, blood thinners, chemotherapy, and so forth. So we don't want to adversely affect things that are stabilizing and saving lives. With many of the other ones, you just use some basic caution. The other thing I always say is don't use an herb and a drug for the same thing without adjusting your dosing of one or the other.
There was a similar version question that was
Yeah.
like for like. So
Last but not least, when normally, and I just did it myself, when we talk about herb-drug interactions, we always have this negative connotation to it, when the reality is we should talk about the positive aspects of herb-drug interactions, and we can improve the action of them. One of my favorites to talk about is the use of antigraphists, Xuan Lian, in conjunction with antibiotics to prevent antibiotic resistance. And so we can use, it's not an herb, but close enough, probiotics used in conjunction with antibiotics to prevent yeast infections and digestive issues. CoQ10, and again, a nutraceutical, not an herb, in conjunction with statin drugs to prevent some of the side effects with that, and the muscle disease.
Endographis with the antibiotics, so that we okay.
So we need to think of both positive and negative aspects, that if somebody is on prescription drugs, to be cautious, to be alert to any dramatic changes in status. And the one to really do your homework on is the narrow therapeutic margin medications. Other than that, I don't overthink it. You know, if they're on blood pressure meds and we give some herbs that might help with blood pressure, or even if we use herbs that might, if they have a lot of heat and we're cooling them off, creating balance, and they happen to have hypertension or high blood pressure, if we cool them off, their blood pressure will come down. That's called monitor their blood pressure, and if it starts to get low, go see their doctor and have them get them off the stupid medications. You know, that's positive or negative, depending on how you look at it. So I know a lot of herbalists are so fearful. Like, it's funny when we talk to folks who are like herbalists out in California or out on the West Coast there, where people are super generally healthy, very few people on prescription drugs. And they're like, we live in the South. If you're 12, you're probably on 2 prescription drugs. It's rare to see a 20-year-old that's not on a couple beyond birth control. And, you know, certainly if you're 50 or 60, you've got to be on 5 to 10 prescription medications, and half your organs have been removed.
Plus all the things that are now over the counter that used to be prescription.
Yeah, your acid reflux meds. They don't
think to tell us those.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Like, they're like, oh my God, how do you work on that? And I'm like, yeah, just figure it out. And you look at the books and you think energetics and you treat what you see. And those you start small and you increase your dosage slowly and monitor all of the various issues. And you encourage people to get blood work. You encourage people to see their doctors and ask the doctor hard questions and check their liver enzymes. And I'll end on this note because it's almost time.
Yeah, it's time.
There is now 2 herbalists that work at the Cleveland Clinic as compounding herbalists. They're both, I think at least one of them is an acupuncturist as well. And at the Cleveland Clinic, the MDs are referring people to this. The people come specifically. They're on salary with the Cleveland Clinic. Mm-hmm. And they got a license because they're acupuncturists, but they primarily do herbal medicine. And you know what? They have all of those patients every 3 months have to do liver and kidney function tests. And there are very few times that those numbers are elevated at all. They're almost always also in prescription drugs that are probably causing the issue. And their herbs are constantly being formulated and adjusted, and they're doing the labs to ensure that they are safe and having positive benefits. And it's showing that it is safe and beneficial, more so than either one by themselves, to do the herbs and drugs together, and using the labs to confirm the safety and efficacy of those medications. So, there's benefits to the modern stuff too. I'm still a fan of the old school stuff that's behind me. So that's enough questions for now. Sorry that it took me so long to get up the event. It was only a few hours ago, so it's not your fault. We'll be posting this on YouTube at Tradition School of Herbal Studies. This is Bob Linde, acupuncture physician, registered herbalist, and Renee Prince, who is also a registered herbalist and healer.
And remember, even if Bob doesn't post this happens every month.
Every month. The last Friday of every month from 6 to 8 p.m. Check out all of our other stuff at Tradition School of Herbal Studies, traditionsherbschool.com, or if you'd like to see one of us as a practitioner, come by the apothecary or see all kinds of other cool stuff in the medicinal plants in the back. You can find us at 2520 Central Avenue in St. Petersburg, Florida, or learn more at acuherbals.com. Dang, I'm getting good at this. I hope we see you in some of our classes or on one of our other live stream things.
Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah, we're on all that stuff. And YouTube has just tons and tons of our classes recorded for your use. We also have recorded many of our online paid classes that you can get access to for a small fee. Bye. Bye.